After we heard this,
I'm gonna tell him that if he doesn't propose by the end of this year, we're over.
the Office production would shut down while the cast and crew went out for a much-deserved break. Picking up the story nearly a full month later, we were all eager to see where the rest of Season 7 of The Office would take us. By now, we knew that Carell was not coming back for another season, meaning that his arc was nearing completion. Would Holly and Michael end up together? Would Dwight and Andy meet loose women?
Roller derby practice.
Would Stanley become a better husband and boyfriend? Framing this momentous episode around holding ourselves and each other accountable for our New Year's resolutions was a fantastic idea.
Eat it!
Written by Carrie Kemper, Ellie Kemper's little sister, and making his way out of the editing room and into the director's chair was David Rogers. The Ultimatum is a big episode with a lot of small plot lines, so let's just dive right in.
I understand nothing.
I really like framing this section as a recap, so from this point on, I think I'm probably just going to do that. That's what to expect. Kicking it off sometime during the winter break, apparently, Jim somehow got into the office in order to retrieve his BlackBerry. There's a lot of phone stuff going on in this episode, by the way. Either on purpose or accidentally, Jim stumbles into Dwight using the Dunder Mifflin offices for non-business purposes, which seems like something Dwight would be vehemently opposed to if Dwight were not the owner of the building, and also Michael's right-hand man.
Ad-lib masturbation joke.
Jim makes no effort to mock this group, but Dwight's apparent insecurity about his involvement tries to beat Jim to the punch. In doing so, he mocks Leader's voice.
Dwight, don't be bothered, blah, 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 blah.
Who this guy, by the way, is credited as Leader. My brain went straight to calling him Samuel Stearns. Dwight reads out the meeting minutes because even here he is assistant to the Leader. It's revealed that the Knights of the Night had some fun playing some youth group games the night before. Hard cut with no punchline whatsoever.
Just leaving now.
We're going to get into that later. Michael's filming something once again at his desk. Mechanic, go ahead and hit that quick cut.
Hey, Mom. Happy birthday, belatedly.
Hello, son. If you're watching this, that means I'm already dead.
It's so not fair that they want me to resign. I would just like to remind you that in much of the Netherlands, swimming naked is the norm. So in Norway, you'd be the weirdos.
Aaron is taking over the receptionist responsibility of filming Michael, but this time is tasked to put together a happy and a sad cut, depending on the outcome of the day. Holly, along with the rest of the staff, are all coming back from their holiday break, and Michael and Kelly have riled up everyone with anticipation.
If she's not engaged, in all honesty, I may just burn this whole place to the ground out of happiness.
I think we're supposed to read this as hyperbole, but having seen how this plays out, I'm not really sure Michael's speaking figuratively about what his happiness would drive him to do.
You know what? Do you have a siphon? I think I'm gonna run out of gas. I'm asking Holly a question in fire.
Back in the office, Little Miss Attention is hyper and peppy and ready to hit the ground running and really flesh out her new role as office admin in the new year. Having met the admin from down the hall, Pam creates
this resolution board.
It's been a while since I've worked in a really small office, but does anyone actually enjoy this kind of stuff? Pam's fangirling over Sue's work, and this freeze frame would tell me that, Pam, this is not the life you want. No offense, Sue, she seems fine.
She's not that great.
But the quick freeze frame on this board, I do love some of the details here. The sign at the top says, "What's the best that could happen?" Which creates a half glass full versus half glass empty kind of thing. I think it's meant to imply, envision the great things that can be. But I read it as, you're just working advanced refrigeration. What's the best that could happen? Probably not the right way to read that.
It's not a party at all. It's just sad.
Moving on and continuing his divide and conquer strategy, Michael consults Erin as she packs a happy and a sad box. Each of these, like the video, represents the two very real possibilities for the day. There is a subplot in these episodes with Erin not expressly shipping. Like, is there an opposite for shipping? Which I hate that word anyway, but it seems whatever. Erin is not a fan of Michael and Holly being together. Now, maybe this is something that will be fleshed out in a Superfan episode, but in my headcanon, it's because she's projecting Michael into that fatherly figure that we've already talked about, And she's probably taking on that teen angst, no one's good for my dad kind of thing. As Holly makes her way back to the office, she is not wearing an engagement ring.
Hey, right back at you, bitch.
This, by the way, is not something you ever want to say to your HR representative. They have the power to make things really good or bad for you at your job. Michael dashes back, though, to begin the celebration, which leads to a sequence that I feel I could just watch on repeat anytime I'm down. Like, I literally just smile during this section. Unfortunately, because it plays an absolute banger from Kelly Clarkson, I could lose my house with copyright claims. But just so you know how amazing this cut is, I'd like to sub in some music because you have to experience what Rogers did here with the editing.
Hey, Dwight, I'm collecting resolution.
So good. Pam's board is nearly complete though, but she's having some issues getting all of the resolutions. Andy's resolution on the surface kind of reflects this pity party he's having. Angela's basically the same as Kelly's.
Who's the senator?
My boyfriend.
Oh, you mean the state senator?
Oh, my resolution was to get more attention.
And Dwight's seems to be a resolution out of spite.
My resolution is meet a loose woman.
This leads us to a diverging plot line, as Daryl manipulates the Lonely Hearts Club into picking up chicks at the local bookstore. Michael realizes that Holly and AJ are very much still together. Following the extended lunch outing, Daryl and the boys separate out so he can buy some books incognito, and the two middle-aged men strike out hard on the second floor of a Barnes & Noble under the watchful eye of Joe Bennett. And I'm sure there is a story about this actress here, as her credits read as a handful of acting projects dating back from 2003 all the way up to 2011 when this episode was released. She also was listed as a personal assistant to both Ed Helms and Paul Feig on their respected vehicles. Feig, if you don't know, was a showrunner on The Office for a while and directed several classic episodes, including one of my personal favorites, The Dinner Party. He's also the animal trainer from the Starmageddon episode, if you didn't know that. On their way home, the group takes a detour to a strip joint in order to meet loose women. Daryl talks them out of it, and then they decide to spend the rest of their day, maybe. This feels like this goes on for quite a while, but they spend the rest of their time at the roller rink across the street. So this Skateland rink is in the valley, but it did unfortunately close back during the pandemic. This place was used for several films back in the day. Owners even trained the likes of Olivia Newton-John and James Caan for different roller skating roles. The building's actually up for sale if anyone's interested in that sort of thing. By the way, there is no strip club here, and maybe there never was, but this U-Haul building actually seemed to be holding strong all the way here in the year 2022. Don't date videos. As the trio skate, one by one they go off to fulfill their resolutions. More on that in a minute. Back at the office, upon learning that Holly still is very much one half of a couple with Rob Hubel, Michael's tone changes entirely. As Pam holds, I guess, a lunchtime conference room meeting about keeping your New Year's resolutions on track, she's explaining Wikipedia-ish steps on how to stick to those New Year's resolutions.
Wikipedia is the best thing ever. Anyone in the world can write anything they want about any subject. So you know you are getting the best possible information.
This kicks off a sequence of events in which Michael uses the fact that Creed and Kevin can't stick to their resolutions as a way to confront Holly indirectly. Shame could be a powerful motivator for yourself, but shaming others, I mean, people may play along for a while, but only for so long.
It was traumatizing, Michael. I wouldn't be surprised if I never ate a vegetable again.
Michael goes to apologize to Holly, but the pretense is done. She saw through the whole thing and is cordial and respectful while shooting Michael's attempt to make it right down. In what is honestly a great decision, Michael calls on Holly as an HR representative to be present while he apologizes for his behavior to Kevin Creed. The subtext here is that he cares about Holly and that it was selfish to only look at her decisions by how they affected him. This seems to have an actual impact on Holly and Kevin as she begins to question the sincerity and longevity of her relationship with AJ. Then she immediately calls a man and puts that relationship on hold. I wonder how much you get paid, by the way, for your likeness to be used in a single episode of The Office. Like, you know that he gets a royalty check once a month for the Ultimatum episode in which his picture just shows up on Holly's desk. It's gonna be like 45 cents or something sent to him every month. Show business. Meanwhile, the Office resolution board becomes absolute chaos.
I did it. I did a cartwheel.
You, God!
Okay, that's it.
Confirming to me that the actual message of this episode is that stuff like this
is garbage.
Lesson learned.
Don't you garbage.
and also that no good deed goes unpunished. The ultimatum concludes with Michael staying late to, in a very Pam-like fashion, read Wikipedia-ish articles to Creed in an attempt to help him work through his New Year's resolution, which he does. The Ultimatum is a fascinating episode with a lot going on. It is missing Jim, though, if you ever noticed. My headcanon is that he was just out biking more, but a deleted scene would reveal that he was out on a sales call that day.
10 miles to Williamsport. I'm gonna sell this town so hard on paper.
John Krasinski was actually out shooting Big Miracle in Alaska. Tuna.
Wet tuna.
Our characters in this one are all reaching for the better versions of themselves that they want to see. So let's talk about that in the deeper meaning.
What does a bean mean?
Someone please explain it to Captain.
Okay, so let's start with something we didn't talk about last week at all. An ultimatum is made up of two parts. First is a demand, a do this type statement, and the second part is a consequence. Now, in the heat of a moment, we tend to summarize ultimatums with something like, or else, or oh, so help me. So, you better like this video, or so help me. Or, please subscribe, or else.
You have one day.
One day for what?
They always give an ultimatum.
But in order for an ultimatum to be effective, it does need to be consequential. The or else needs to be impactful. Holly's, for example, is AJ, marry me, or I'm leaving, which is a whole lot to unpack.
I don't know a lot of happy marriages that start off with an ultimatum, do you?
No.
I know the writers needed to present some conflict for Michael and Holly to overcome here. I get that. It makes the payoff so much more rewarding if they give some drama up front. But why have Holly do something that doesn't really put her in a good light? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And look, it's important to tell your partner what you want, what you don't want, what your hopes and dreams are for the future and for the very real present. These are all good things. But on the flippity flip, you can go look at any Wikipedia level advice on the internet and see that ultimatums are practically considered a form of manipulation or toxic.
Ultimatums are key. Basically, nobody does anything for me anymore unless I threaten to kill myself.
And that's because relationships should be built upon mutual trust, love, and respect for one another. Presenting an ultimatum can create a drastic power dynamic shift in a relationship, and that's not always a good sign of a healthy relationship that's supposed to be built upon mutual trust and love and all of that. So putting that couples counselor hat on for just a moment, Holly probably should have just stated her desire to get married up front to AJ, and then moved on if that wasn't in his plans. Putting that aside for now, the theme in this episode is trying to get to that better version of yourself. A lot of historians think that New Year's resolutions actually date back something like 4,000 years and came out of Babylonian culture, which, if your first thought is, what would those resolutions have looked like back then? Well, I'm pretty sure they weren't like this. They were more like promises to the gods that they'd pay back their debts and return things that they'd borrowed. At any rate, self-betterment and clearing yourself of traits and vices that you don't want are very common. The Office has some fun with this in The Ultimatum. Some of these, like Stanley's and Ryan's and Kelly's, are just intended to be jokes about the characters themselves. But that doesn't mean there's nothing we can learn here. From Creed, we can learn that there's joy and confidence, even in small victories. From Kevin, we can learn that trying new things is sometimes really uncomfortable and awkward. Oh! And rarely the goal that we set out for ourselves is going to be easy. From Daryl, we learn that reaching new heights might come from a path we would never have foreseen us taking. From Andy, we can learn that finding ourselves satisfied can happen with some good music and some time alone, doing what we love to do. By the way, this was my very first CD I ever owned. From Holly and Dwight, we can learn that sometimes the sights we set our vision on are not what we really want. And from Michael, we can learn that truly impactful resolutions come from a place of selflessness. For real, I don't think I could love the character of Michael Scott any more than in this episode, and tell him to keep his head up, and I think he's a good man for apologizing, and for this line, which he swaps up his New Year's resolution.
My resolution? I never want to make Holly cry again. Unless it's from laughing too hard. Or making love too beautifully.
It gets me every time. I think the reason we tend to fail at our resolutions doesn't come from a place of inadequacy or incompetence, but from compromise, because compromise begets compromise. And sooner or later, we find ourselves in a real pickle, which are still disgusting, by the way.
God.
And speaking of disgusting, by the way, a lot of times behavior that we want to implement to realize the futures that we want to see rarely feel gratifying in the short term. Like if every time I had a multivitamin, I felt as good as I do when I drink a Red Bull, then you could be certain that I'd be popping Flintstones before every time I hit record. It'd be magical. But instead, almost everything worth doing in this life requires a constant grind of good choices and difficult quandaries. Be it fitness, relationships, schools, or our jobs, or whatever. New year, new resolutions, new you, all that. Let's rate this thing.
This is the worst!
As Joe Bennett once said, you can't give me gravy and tell me it's jelly, because gravy ain't sweet, is it? To which Jim said,
I don't think so.
Michael?
Forget the question.
And that kind of sums up my feelings on this cold opening. They have a great setup.
Minutes from previous meeting of Knights of the Night. It's our official name, Jim.
Sounds good.
Iconic, really. The team is executing all the way down the field, and then they fumble on the 1 yard line. I just don't get it. I love what they're doing here. It's fantastic, really. And then it just ends. There's no punchline, no "oh, you guys" moment, which cruises into the theme song. Just a phone call that stops it. I don't know. It just feels off or unfinished, really. I think it could have been interesting to see this come up again in any way, shape, or form, either in this episode or in some future iteration. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think we ever see or hear Knights of the Night again, which is honestly kind of a drag. I'm going to give this one a 1 out of 5. Do better, guys.
You, God!
As for the ultimatum, I pretty much have already talked about the part I have a distaste for, and that's the toxic part of this actual ultimatum. Given Holly didn't actually go through with those consequences, or did she? I do wonder if there was a better way to handle some of these non-Michael Holly plotlines, but as they are, I do enjoy this episode. The ultimatum opens up the doorway to hope for Michael finding some happiness. And having recently restarted watching The Office with season 1, episode 1, it's crazy to think about how far we've come with the character of Michael Scott, being someone who we would never root for to someone who's come so far. That's what she said. But past that, I don't have a whole lot more to say about the ultimatum. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. And possibly just because I can't help but smile when I see Michael's parties. Guys, thank you so much for watching this. That's all I have to say about the ultimatum. If you could give this video a like and the rest of the YouTube-y stuff, that'd be awesome. Definitely helps me out. Next week, we're watching The Seminar, and I have a lot of other things cooking in the background. Thank you so much for watching. I couldn't and wouldn't do any of this without all of you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.